Okay, so I'm just going to summarize real quickly our summer water quality monitoring for bacteria. This program was paid for with funds from the Lake Quinsigamond Commission, the City of Worcester, and the Watershed Association, and volunteers from the Watershed Association. This is a map of our sampling locations. We start, our northernmost sample is Coal Mine Brook. We have two midpoint samples at 7 and 12. Those are midpoint lake. We have Billings Brook at Eastern Cove, Eastern Condos. No, Eaglehead Condos. This is the UMass outfall. Then we have Tilly Brook at the old Buca de Beppo. And this is the Belmont Street outfall underneath the bridge. Then we have Fitzgerald Brook. And we have the Whitla Ave Station / O'Hara Brook down here. And this is Meadowbrook. So we collect our bacteria samples and we compare them to our surface water quality standards for Massachusetts. And they are the same as those defined by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. We use E. coli as our indicator bacteria. And what I want you to pay attention to is the blue and the red in the next table. So the two standards that we compare our results to are no single sample shall exceed 235 colonies, that's in the red. And the 5 most recent samples, when we take the geometric mean, they may not exceed 126 colonies. If either of these numbers are exceeded, we are in violation of the surface water quality standards. So this table is a result of all our sampling since May 25th through September 13th. We had one more round in the end of September. Actually, it ended up being early October because of some scheduling conflicts. I don't have those results on my table, but I don't expect the averages to change too much with that result, but they'll be in our final report. So in this slide, I want you to see that the blue represents, on this side, represent those sample locations that exceeded the geometric mean. So for the 5 most recent samples. So we had 5 locations out of our 10 sample locations. We had 5 that exceeded the geo mean of 126. And you can see here they range from 1,000 to 161. And then the red indicates each sample that exceeded our single sample maximum. So we had exceedances at 7 of the 10 locations. The only sample locations that did not exceed one single time were our 2 midpoint samples in the lake and at the UMass outfall. And this side, the takeaway I want you to get out of this slide is this is a summary of our data quality objectives. And basically we met all of our data quality objectives for accuracy and precision based on our duplicates and our blanks. So our sampling was done according to our objectives. This is a graph basically of all of our sample results, and in the report we'll have Gia and Jin will have a summary of each one of the sample locations, but here I just wanted to illustrate the range and the results that we got. They ranged up to over 20,000 at Coal Mine Brook, and then we had our 3 sample locations that didn't have any exceedances. We also had some very elevated concentrations at the Belmont Street outfall and at Fitzgerald Brook and O'Hara. These are well above our standards. And here's, I blew up the lower part of the graph to show our standard. So our single sample maximum cannot exceed 235 colony forming units, and this is represented by this line. And our max geomean cannot exceed 126, represented by this line. So you can see that the majority of the samples we collected exceeded the water quality standards. The 3 sample locations I mentioned before, the 2 mid-lake samples and the UMass outfall fall below both of these standards. And also this one is Meadowbrook. There was only 1 exceedance of the geometric mean and a few exceedance of only 1 exceedance of the geometric mean. So again, here's our sampling, and this shows the 3 locations, Mid-Lake and the UMass outfall, no bacteria exceedances. Okay, then shows the locations where we had at least 1 exceedance of the single sample max. So at each of these locations, these 7 locations, we had at least 1 exceedance over the summer of the standard. And this shows where we had exceedances of the geomean, meaning the 5 most recent samples, the geometric mean exceeded the standard. So just a summary again, 7 samples exceeded the single sample max 1 or more times. 5 sample locations exceeded the allowable geomean for the 5 most recent sampling rounds. What the geomean does is it kind of averages out some really high numbers and really low numbers. So that's where we look at the geomean. And these are the 5 locations that had exceedances of the geomean: Belmont, Outfall, Coal Mine Brook, Billings Brook, O'Hare near Witless Station, and Fitzgerald Brook. 3 locations that did not exceed the single sample max were the 2 Mid-Lake samples and the UMass outfall. So what are some of the takeaways we want you to get from this is that we have bacteria sources in the watershed. There are many, they're varied, and we haven't identified them. Bacteria was recorded in samples collected in dry and wet weather. Even though we had quite a bit of rain in July, we actually, of our 10 sample locations, I think only 3 were considered wet weather, meaning it had rained within the previous 24 hours of sample collection. And bacteria contamination is a potential issue at each of the tributaries to the lake at some point in time. Bacteria was not elevated. That means it was less than the swimming standard in the mid-lake samples. Wet weather samples had some of the highest concentrations, reflecting bacteria sources in the stormwater runoff. We'll have more details in our final report, but I wanted to give you this summary. We'll have that report on our lqwa.org website. And I wanted to say thank you to Mike Liberty, who drove the boat. This is Jin. He was our summer intern who collected the samples, and Gia Coleman, who's going to speak next. And she supervised Jin, trained him, and supervised the QA/QC of the data, and will be QA-seeing the final report. And Gia wants to talk a little bit about last year's data in addition to this year's data.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm having some technical difficulties I'm actually on my phone right now. I had to call in, but maybe at the next meeting, I'll have a nice presentation for everybody. But right now I'm on the phone, and I would try to pull up a PowerPoint slide on my phone, but that would probably make the internet just crash altogether. So I'm going to go ahead and yield my time. Thank you. I'm so sorry I couldn't be a more active role with the sampling, but I appreciate everyone's hard work, and I'm so, again, happy to be a part of this monitoring program. So thank you for all, and have a good night, and we'll see you next month.
Okay. Any questions or comments regarding?
I have a quick question. I know we've talked about this in the past, but is there any more thought on trying to identify the sources of bacteria? For example, whether they're goose or dog or human? Has any more thought been done in that area?
We did a lot of thinking on that, and it's difficult because you have to, sample bottles themselves are very expensive, just ordering them, and then you can collect a sample. You have to know that you have a bacteria, you had a high bacteria hit, and then send it off and request the DNA analysis. So the timing is difficult. So by the time you get the bacteria results, so you have to not only pay for the bacteria, you have to pay for a quick turnaround, like a 24-hour turnaround, then send a DNA sample. So it's been problematic for us. It's also really expensive. So as I said 3 times already. So we are going to give this data to the city. Jacqueline's been aware of this sampling, and to the town of Shrewsbury, and hope that they can use that in their stormwater tracking. I don't feel that it's the responsibility of a volunteer organization to be doing that. That's the city, that's part of their stormwater permit, is to be identifying sources. We're identifying that bacteria is a problem. Now you guys figure it out. That's how I feel. So bacteria source tracking is a very difficult process to then go up the watershed and to sample at all the locations, all the potential inflows at each of these tributaries. So it's a very involved process and very time consuming. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Anyone else have a question or comment? Okay. Bill, good question. And, from my perspective, I agree with Barbara that I don't think it's the watershed's responsibility. This particular program, we're working in conjunction with the watershed and the commission and the city, lakes and ponds. So that's really good news. But I will say that if anyone asks me what is the most dangerous thing we face in Lake Quinsigamond, they're probably going to expect my answer would be, well, jet skis or wakeboards, the towers versus the rowers or something like that. I think that the most dangerous thing in Lake Quinsigamond right now is what we just talked about. And because the rowers and the towers and the jet skis and all that stuff is pretty seasonal. Like you can almost tell the season by the the phone calls I'm getting. Whereas these other the bacteria issues and the outflows are a 365 days a year problem. So it's coming in, we don't know where a lot of times we don't know what exactly it is, and we don't know where it's coming from. So I think in the long run, the commission should probably look at doing some type of viable biomarker program. And I know that Jacqueline's doing some stuff, and Barbara's right. It's extremely challenging to pull that off, and there's all kinds of logistic stuff, and the labs don't get it back in time. So there's a lot of hurdles to get over, but I don't think it's something that we can never do. And I'd like to keep it in the plan over time. So it's something I'll ask the commissioners to keep in mind, that I'd like to keep this going, at least at the testing part of it. And you saw that report, and it's so valuable information that we're getting that, and that was extremely well presented, Barb. And I do really want to thank everyone that was involved in that, especially the volunteers that were involved all year in doing that stuff, because they took their own time out there. They went out when they hauled themselves out there and did it. So it's not always easy or pleasant.